Early childhood educators have a strong commitment to the welfare, development, and protection of children. Today I'll be taking you through some key articles within the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children, with connections to the Early Years Learning Framework, so that through your professional practice and planning, you can consider advocacy in relation to choices you make for these children. You'll find attached a document showing links to the convention in both a simplified version, a full text version, and links to the UNICEF website for alternate language versions. I have also included links to the Early Years Learning Framework with a separate link to the National Education website for access to the framework in other languages. It is important before we begin that we know a little about the development of children's rights. An international treaty to protect children's rights was proposed to the General Assembly of the United Nations in 1979, also the International Year of the Child. It took 10 years to draft what we now know as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. You may know it as the UNCRC or the Convention. This document categorizes rights into provision, protection, and participation rights. In 1990, Australia ratified the Convention, although we have yet to incorporate the document into national law. In 2003, Megan Mitchell was appointed our first National Children's Commissioner. The development of the Early Years Learning Framework was a huge step forwards towards supporting children's rights. The document has a strong emphasis on children's rights and explicitly states that educators, with the guidance of the Early Years Learning Framework, will reinforce the rights of the child through their daily practice. But first, let's ask ourselves, what is advocacy? In the past, advocacy has been seen as efforts towards children with additional needs, children with English not as their home language, children from diverse backgrounds and cultures such as Indigenous children or children from lower socioeconomic households. Whilst advocacy does encompass these children, it does not exclude others. Advocacy includes all children. It can be seen as a child's rights to having someone listen to their needs and speak on their behalf. As early childhood educators, a part of your role is to make decisions on behalf of children. In order to do this, you would need to listen to the child's needs, whether it be a request for pink paint from a 3-year-old or a cry of tiredness from a child. When you listen to their needs, you are then able to make the best decision for them on their behalf. So how can we promote advocacy within our early years learning environment? We can reaffirm. Remember that all children have a right to be heard, no matter their age, gender, race, culture, or ability. As educators, you have a voice with children, parents, families, support personnel, and within your community. We can educate. Article 42 of the Convention states that the rights of a child should be known to all parents and children. You are in a valuable position of being able to directly influence and educate these families on children's rights. You have opportunities through newsletters, the Centre website, Facebook, your weekly reflections, and in children's portfolios. Educate also relates to you and your colleagues' own awareness, reflection, and professional development with children's rights in mind. We can engage. Consider a child's rights in your planning. Keep a copy of the convention with your planning documents so that you can reference them. Foster a welcoming and inclusive environment for parents and children. When we know what is going on in children's lives, we're better able to understand their choices and reactions, and in turn are able to respond to their needs in a more holistic manner. We can protect. Children are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. In many cases, you will be the person to claim rights on their behalf. Through your planning, you can put the best interests of the child first and ask yourself, how will this benefit this child? Take time to reflect upon your work in a meaningful and honest manner with children's rights in mind. We can respect. When working with children, we must take into account their family, culture, traditions, needs, strengths, and interests. We must respect that a child has their own identity and encourage their emerging autonomy. In turn, we must also model and teach children to respect others. Let's take a moment now to unpack some key articles in the Convention with relation to the Early Years Learning Framework. As I discuss the two documents, I'll be showing you some images of the framework in direct reference to articles within the Convention. Article 12 states that children have a right to their opinion and for adults to listen and take it seriously. This does not mean that you need to do everything a child says. As educators, you must listen to a child's needs and make appropriate decisions for them. When possible, children can be involved in the decision-making. The Early Years Learning Framework states in its principles that an educator needs to be attuned to children's thoughts and feelings. It encourages open communication with families and shared decision-making amongst families, educators and children. As educators, you are upholding Article 12 of children's rights in your practice when you are responsive to children. By interacting with babies and children, we are building a relationship with them and generating open dialogue. This promotes a safe and supported environment, achieving learning outcome number 1, children have a strong sense of identity. When we look at the learning outcomes in the Early Years Learning Framework in relation to Article 12, we can see many opportunities to foster an environment that supports this right. Take a moment now to pause this presentation and individually or with your colleagues, look through Learning Outcomes 3, 4 and 5 and circle the areas that directly relate to Article 12. Discuss or reflect upon ways in which you already uphold this right. Ask yourselves now how you can further uphold a child's right to a voice and an opinion. In your planning, consider a child's strengths and interests, open communication throughout the day, and a child's cultural background and traditions. Ensure there is a flexibility within the program so that you can make room for a child's voice to be heard and responded to, and encourage contribution from families and open communication. Included here are some ideas developed with an advocacy agenda in mind. Take a moment to look through them and brainstorm further, either with your colleagues or individually. As we look now at further articles within the Convention, we can see that some of them are connected and support each other. For example, we are upholding Article 3 when we plan based on children's strengths and interests and for diversity, listen to children, apply the Early Years Learning Framework, and even in watching this presentation. As we come to the end of this presentation, I remind you that a vital aspect of your professional practice is reflection. Without reflection, you are unable to plan effectively. At the end of this presentation, take the time as individuals or in a group to complete the reflection activity in relation to Articles 13, 17 and 29. Consider these 3 articles with regards to what they have in common. Discuss them in relation to the documents that you use to guide your professional practice. This could include your centre philosophy, the Early Years Learning Framework, the National Quality Framework, and even your own personal philosophy as an educator. Ask yourselves, how are we supporting these rights? What can we do better? How can we plan with these rights in mind? And how can we educate our families on these rights?